Welcome, everybody. Paul, take it away.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world, please welcome to the T our next very special guest. He's the LA transplant who went from beach bum to good old boy, giving up California dreaming for sweet home Carolina with meaning. He's Aristotle, the fairway philosopher, and the man with the top flight haiku kung fu. He's the patriarch of the family that rolls together and holds together. He rolls tide, he grills tide, he even washes his clothes in tide. He's the two-time world champ and the man with the plan to put the Innova Star stamp in all hands across all lands. He has a BSc from USC, and it's clear that this cat can see the future far better than you and me. He's the muse of Mount Duvius, whose goal is to bring world peace and happiness to all of us. On the tee, please welcome the big thrill from Rock Hill, Harold Duvall.
Thank you, Paul. What a beautiful intro. I hope I can fulfill a fraction of that.
Well, it was a lot of fun putting the research together, finding all that stuff.
Well, we can always revisit this if we need to cover any uncharted or uncovered territory from tonight. Well, thanks for joining us, Harold.
That sounded great, Brian. I have to make sure that I can still fit my head through the door after that wonderful introduction. I'll do my best.
I'm sure that I can count on your two sons that are present there to help with all that.
Absolutely.
So
all right, so go ahead, Paul.
No, I was just going to say, for those of you out there who may not, and benighted individuals they may be who have never known who Harold Duvall is, why don't we give a little captured framework about our special guest tonight?
All right, so I'm gonna run over a few things, and then we can talk about it, and then I'll run over a couple of more things. But first and foremost, welcome, Harold Duvall. You were the first ever PDGA World Champion. You were also the first ever two-time winner, and one of only 6 people who can say that. You're the co-founder and one of the co-owners. You're a co-founder and one of the co-owners of Innova Discs, and you're a course designer. Excuse me, and the man who, according to Paul, the man who gifted Winthrop Gold to the world. And obviously, we should go over a few of those things right now. I mean, obviously, pretty neat to be the first ever PDGA World Champion, and then to be the first one to back it up a second time.
That was amazing. And with the first World Championship, that was actually my first PDGA event. I signed up in the line with my good friend Tim Selinsky, and thankfully Tim had a pen because I wasn't responsible enough to have a pen. But as always, Tim came through for me and had a pen, and that was my first PDGA event. I had played the WAMO overall type events that had disc golf, but really that was my first professional PDGA disc golf event, was that first Worlds.
What a way to start.
Paul, yeah, amazing. I mean, that's Paul's a really astute researcher, and he's like, I've been reading over the script today, and I looked it over a couple of days ago when he sent it over to me, and it's really interesting to see a lot of names that were there in the beginning, and now a lot of them that are still involved. Like I didn't realize that, I mean, I knew Mark Molinar went pretty far back, but I didn't realize he went back to some of these early days, and he was one of those early youngsters out there at La Mirada, along with Sam, and so that's pretty interesting that he's still in the fold with y'all today, and quite a few other people too.
Yeah.
So anyways,
we're going to get into specifically your World's experience. He just wants to dip in a lily dip in now, but believe you me, this is some really interesting stuff we want to talk to you about, because right at for all of us who were able to look on YouTube and see some of the old video, it's like, wow, that's another world back then.
Oh gosh, hopefully not the long tube shot socks and short shorts
Oh, there might
video.
be, there may
My
be some
kids
tube
have
socks.
loved that one.
There may be some tube socks involved in this whole thing by the time it's over with.
Oh, me.
So, a little bit more information about you. You were in the PDGA Hall of Fame class of '94, and you were inducted into the SoCal Disc Sports Hall of Fame in 2019. And that number that you got in line at the what was that, the 1982 World Championships, was
Yeah.
2018. And you've got 156 career events. You've got 4 wins. Pretty amazing that 2 of them are world championships, the 82 World Championship and the 85 World Championship. And then you won the 84 Coors La Mirada Open at your home course. And then we don't have what the 4th one was. What was your 4th win?
I imagine it was the Oak Grove Open in
Oh, nice.
in Southern California at the time. The Oak Grove Open and the La Mirada Open back in the 80s were really, really big events. And
Well, isn't Oak Grove like the 45th annual at this point, or closing in on 50?
yeah, I mean, it was the first disc golf.
Is that the Wintertime Open now? Is that what
Yeah,
that turned
yeah.
into?
Yeah,
Okay.
back
It's
in the day.
Interesting. That was the Bud Light Wintertime Open, and La Mirada had the Coors
Yeah,
La Mirada Open. I mean, we even had beer turf wars back then. Also, just two quick things that I want to mention that Mace may have overlooked, but you are the recipient of the 1993 Bob West Memorial Award for
Oh,
sportsmanship.
I didn't see that.
And that's an incredible honor. As well, you're the recipient of the 2001 Grant Hambrick TD of the Year Award, obviously for your work at the USDPC, which is one of the biggest things. You are the founder and the head of that too. But I just want to start by looking at your origin story, and for me, that's always that's where we start with the interviews with the people, and I, one of the great things I find about the internet is things do exist forever there. It's sometimes hard to find consistent quality information, especially, putting things into a calendar or a chronological order is sometimes a little more challenging. But what I did find, at least through the PDJ, which is amazing because they keep great records, is your first official event. If you go on the Harold Duvall page on the PDJ website, you'll find 1979. I want to take you back to that year. You're 17 years old. You're living in Southern California. I'm not going to show the video or photos, but you were wearing tube socks most of the time. Thanks to Steady Ed and Stork, Whammo, the Frisbee is in the zeitgeist. Everybody knows what a Frisbee is in the late 70s. But you in Southern California are at the epicenter of the Frisbee freak revolution. I imagine it was Charlie who was your gateway into the Frisbee world. He having been the reigning DDC champion at the Whip Dip Worlds in 1978, with Al Bonapane himself, an interesting character with the Bonapane grip. But talk to us more about, was it Charlie who was at your actual gateway into the Frisbee world?
Well, my whole story is one of having really good people come into my disc golf life at various stages. And at the earliest stage was my brother Charlie. I was thinking actually pretty recently, our family grew up with the old school Folgers coffee. And the old school Folgers coffee had a plastic lid on it that was a remarkably good flyer. And you could chunk it around the house at amazingly high speeds. So that was my first Frisbee tossing that I remember. And then I went to high school in San Marino, California. And it sounds kind of stereotypical, but at San Marino, I played volleyball and Frisbee as my varsity sports. We actually had a Frisbee team, and it was one where you got to, in the off season of volleyball, I was looking for a sport to do. In the Frisbee class, you got to be at the park twice a week, and it was co-ed. So it's like, let's go ahead and do Frisbee.
Sounds like a
And-
great idea.
Absolutely. And we did mostly ultimate. And through that, ultimate was really the first serious sport in Frisbee that we did. And we were actually with my brother Charlie and Stork and Al Wanapane and Tim and some others. We were on one of the top West Coast ultimate teams. We lost to the perennial team at the time was the Santa Barbara Condors.
Mm.
And we were often in the finals and often on the losing end with the Condors, but playing ultimate at a high level was kind of my first introduction. And I was lucky enough to actually play ultimate in the Rose Bowl. One of those old school
Nice.
videos is catching a touchdown in the Rose Bowl.
Wow.
It's amazing. And
That's
then,
good stuff.
and then the game of double disc court came along, and Dan Roddick had kind of worked on it and wanted to see it popularized. He and Al Bonapane worked at the Whammo sports promotion department, and my brother Charlie and I were kind of their guinea pigs. Here, y'all, let's set up these courts and let's play this new game. And eventually we got good, and then we started winning. And where we played high school Frisbee class, Lacey Park in San Marino became one of the meccas for DDC. And my brother won a world championship, and he carried me on his back to a finals in DDC, and Dave Dunapace also carried me along to a finals performance. But DDC came after Ultimate, and then disc golf came.
Well, you and Charlie
so-
at that 79 IFA championships, you took second.
Yeah.
And it's cool that you teamed up for that one, because I know you guys had different partners before and after, and you placed well. That tournament itself, I'm not sure if it was the 79 or the 80, but there is a legendary video that's narrated by Casey Kasem that shows the final four of the Frisbee golf. That truly was Frisbee golf then. And the hero of that 1979 tournament was Ken Westerfield, who at the time I think was living in Toronto. Certainly was a huge contributor to Toronto disc golf. But one of the questions I wanted to ask, and I look at those two seems to me prestigious events, IFA World Championships and the WIFDIF, International Frisbee Association, World Flying Disc Federation. At the time, for you guys as players, was one more prestigious than the other, or because I know one was in Santa Cruz, WIFDIF was in Santa Cruz, and IFA was in Irvine. Was it just a north-south thing? Did they mean the same thing?
For me, it was always about the competition I was in. I mean, strangely at Lacey Park, I wanted to stay on the court and not sit. That pressure and that competition there was as much as either the IFA or the WIFDIF, and it was like in our basketball days, when your team lost and you were the one who had to make the free throw to stay on, you wanted to stay on. You didn't want to sit. And so in some ways, they were both amazing amazing events. You know, Tom Schott and everything he did up in Santa Cruz. That was awesome. And Dan Roddick and all the folks really with Whammo, they were both prestigious. And they were both, I wanted to win. That was really more important than the title.
Let me ask two quick questions. Is Charlie older than you or younger than you?
Charlie is older and has more hair. Some things are just not fair in life. That is one
How
of
much
them.
older?
He's 4 years older than I am.
Okay. So then the other question I want to ask, because these names are going to keep popping up. Like we've already seen Dunapace a few times. You already mentioned Selinsky. So was it from these competitions that you met those two guys, or did you know those guys before that?
Well, Tim, of course, I knew Charlie since my whole life.
Obviously, yeah, since you
And Tim went to San Marino High School, the same high school as my brother Charlie and me, and actually two of our partners now, Greg and Gavin Muir, also went to the same high school.
but they're far younger than y'all, aren't they?
Greg is the same. He was in the same class as me at San Marino.
I didn't realize Greg was that old.
And Gavin is a couple of years younger than Greg and I are.
Okay, like my age then.
Yeah, and then actually meeting Dave, it was very interesting when we would go to the IFA World Championship at Irvine. There was kind of almost, it wasn't quite a class thing, but there was rivalry between the various disciplines. And a lot of the freestylers, amazing athletes, came from New York. And they seemed like they were all in the vegetarian line. And almost everyone was in the vegetarian line, eating way better than I ever did at that time. And it seemed like Charlie and I were just about the only ones in the hamburger line. And they had this basketball 3-on-3 competition at night. And Charlie and I loved basketball. But we didn't have a third. And then we saw this big bearded dude who was also in the hamburger line with us. And it's like, well, he's in the right line. Let's see if he knows how to play basketball. And it turns out that Dave was an amazing basketball player who played basketball in college. And we won. There was a lot of talk about which team would win. And I believe we ended up with a case of beer. And in many ways, the foundation of Innova was part of that formation story was a basketball game at Irvine.
Well, and then later on, San Marino High School circles back to the San Marino Rock. I mean, there's all kinds of ties in this story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one more tie that I heard that's got to be, I can't hold it any longer because this is the same time frame, and you mentioned high school, but mutual friend of ours, Ross Porter, told me one time that Van Halen played your prom.
Well, it wasn't Van Halen before they were really Van Halen. Didn't play our prom, but they played high school dances
Sure, just like anybody trying to make it. But that's just interesting that that's from your neighborhood. That's pretty neat.
They came from kind of the adjacent, the city right next to San Marino was Pasadena, a much bigger, more well-known city. And that's where they came from.
Wow.
That's pretty cool. That's an awesome story.
Yeah. That's a great picture on the team.
That's a great
It's
picture.
good to see that I did have a head of hair uh, at one point.
Look at that golden boy,
Yeah,
definitely. So were Charlie and Tim classmates? They knew each
Uh,
other from school?
Charlie was Tim was 2 years ahead of me, and Charlie was, I believe, 2 years ahead of Tim.
So he was the meat in the middle of a Duval sandwich.
Yep.
Right.
And Tim was a amazing DDC player too, and for an incredibly long time had the world record for the fastest caught disc. He had an amazing hands. I mean, his ability to catch things was spectacular, and he had the fastest caught throw for quite a long time.
So in 1980, the PDGA record doesn't have anything for you. Did you not play anything at all in 1980?
Well, I mean, that's the tricky thing because the PDJ, those world championship events weren't necessarily PDJ events. You know, those were big overall events that may have had they're included in the PDJ records now. But they were mainly overall events, that had, in addition to disc golf and DDC, they had distance and MTA and freestyle and a game called Discathon. And that was really the overall event was the main draw. It was bigger than, in my mind, than individual disc golf events. At about that same time, they had also had the $50,000 Whammo event was one of the big tournaments, but that was really, I wasn't really in disc golf. I played in the disc golf part of the overall events, but it wasn't before that first world championship in 1982. That summer, our Frisbee class teacher had one of the few pole holes in Southern California. And I asked him if I could borrow it. And I putted about 3 hours a night. And if you've ever done much putting, it's hard to putt past an hour. Your back gets super tense. But when I went into that first championship, I felt confident putting, and putting in 1982 is the name of the game as it is in 2023.
But see, then you had smaller targets, like the parabolic arc was much sharper, the chains were less numerous, you had a shallower pan that a lot of times was bent outwards, and you were putting with a Frisbee that's 60% larger than a putter.
Yeah, I was going to say
Everything was
fits in
working
the tray.
against you as a player to get that into the hole, and yet you tuned that part of your game up, and you just obviously came out of it as a champion.
Yeah, I practiced a lot, and it's interesting how some of the qualities that we have can be a deficit in some arenas and a benefit in others. And one of those that I have is ADHD. But I have a kind of a special flavor of it, that my attention flickers until it finds something that it likes, and then it's all in. And it almost felt like I was cheating, because it was easy for me to putt. 2 or 3 hours. And it was pretty easy to be undistracted in play. You know, so in some environments that wasn't a gift, but on the disc golf course, it was.
Hmm, that's interesting. You bring up that your putting and your focus on that putting. One of the things from 1981 that stands out, and there's a wonderful collection of disc golf archival material on the Minnesota Frisbee Association website, and connections to that to the Flying Disc Museum website, which is really where a lot of that's preserved. But early disc golf magazines shows a lot of heavy coverage of well, I'm looking at the 81 World Championships. And for the disc golf component of that, and it was again an overall thing where you had to compete in all 5 events, but for the disc golf event, they had a mix of pole holes, which were kind of still newish. I mean, they were talking about 5 years play, but also light poles or other targets. How was that like to go from one to the other? Or was there a whole course that was object and one that was pole holes of the 36?
You know, I honestly don't remember. My home course at the time where the high school team played at, we did disc golf too as part of the class, but it was literally had light poles and flag poles and Christmas trees and tiny little skinny trees. So the course that I grew up on had all kinds of targets, and some of them you'd almost do a run up for a full power throw because the tree was 10 feet around. And then one of the light poles couldn't have been more than the standard pipe on a target now. It was skinny, you know, and that just seemed like, well, if you putt it straight, you know, you're probably going to be okay. But I honestly don't remember, you know, if the course had a mix. At the time, Irvine had a disc golf course on its beautiful campus, but it kind of shared with some other stuff. So it was marked on light poles. But I can't remember if some of the holes had light poles and others had the pole holes or not.
Well, it's just I imagine most of our younger viewers or our younger players, they would just be scandalized at the fact that a world title was contested on non-standard targets. Like, what? How does that even happen? But we skip ahead to 1982, and Mace Munner, you take us into this because this is kind of the seminal year for you, especially certainly in your cementing and solidifying your stature in the disc golf side.
Well, we already covered the we already covered that you got your PDGA membership in 1982 and your number is 2018, and you were born in 62, so that makes you 20 years old when you won this championship. So you started the year, that year is a pretty strong year for you too. You had started the year with a 4th out of 28 at the 5th annual La Mirada Open. First ever junior boys division was won by Sam Ferens by 11 throws over Mark Molinar and Craig Leyva. Craig Leyva took 5th in that one, and I guess last. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah.
And 15 strokes behind. And it's so interesting, you know, like you mentioned, you talked about earlier, like you talked about how you were the test pilot for Double Disc Court, and my disc golf game grew up a lot under Craig Leyva's umbrella. And I've heard story after story after story after story about 252 gram super puppies and about testing numerous different discs at La Mirada, him and, you know, Sam and Scott Stokely and obviously Mark and you know, a lot of these other guys were your test pilots for your discs back then. So I thought that was pretty interesting to see. That was actually what I mentioned from earlier, where I saw Molinar's name and I already knew about Leyva's, you know, association with you in there. But the first ever PDGA World Championships, and Paul's question on that was which courses were used. but the names, like, it's a who's who. Obviously Dave Dunapace was in there, in the hunt, and Joe Ursino. And then at 14th, you had Crazy John Brooks, 17th, Randy Amon, Johnny Lissaman and Jeff Lissaman at 19th and 21st, Dave Greenwell at 24th, Steve Slacer at 24th as well, Stork at 36th, Kevin Stewart at 48th, and then Tim Slinsky coming in 51st. I mean, like, that's a great who's who right there of people, that a lot of those guys are still around.
Yeah, they were probably all wondering who I was.
Yeah.
Because they had all played, a lot of those guys had played disc golf a long time. Dave played disc golf before I did and was PDJ member much lower. Like I said, I signed up for the PDJ, before the first stroke. Yeah, I didn't have a lot of disc golf experience except for overalls and a couple of events. That was really my first PDJ event. It kind of created really unrealistic expectations. One event, one world.
Boom.
Pretty good record. But
One for one. Okay, what do we do next weekend?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Dunapace, he was the 1980 whip diff world champion and the 81 world distance champion, and you knew him, so he was obviously someone that you knew to keep your eyes on as a main contender for the title for the first ever PDGA Worlds. But there must have been a lot of other people. According to Joe Fight, there was at least 15 names that could have won those worlds. Were you aware of the competition when you entered the field?
No, I mean, that's part of my, gift, I want to call it now, is I was back then, it was pretty locked in, and I was not, I never felt like or wanted to be inconsiderate of anyone else. And gamesmanship, I can think of a couple of Hall of Famers who were excellent at gamesmanship, but that really wasn't, I was about my shot. And if I put my shot together enough times, that was really the best I could do. And I felt like I was going to do pretty well. Really, in some ways, Dave is similar. He's really about playing his game, and that was part of, I think one of the foundations of our friendship. And he's about perfecting his game. He had a stretch in there where he had an amazing thumber roller. And that was a really potent weapon at the time. But for some reason, it was not working that day. And he was gonna make that, it was more important to him to make that work. And that really made a huge impression on me. That desire to make something work is more important than a title, and that was a way higher level. And being kind of into my game, I got out of my social shell to the this was way out on me. Being social in me, it was something like, are you sure you want to keep throwing that? And I could see what he was trying to do, and it was like, dang, that's not what other people see the competition as. But he wanted to make it work.
Kind of a tin cup kind of thing, right?
No, it wasn't.
No?
It wasn't Tin Cup. It was Vision Quest, slash samurai looking for the very best, I'm going to find it. And that's more important right now than the competition. He could have gone back to his backhand. And if he had, he probably would have beat me. But he was searching for something. And I've done that too, whether it's for the backhand or the putt or whatever, but that was, it was strange and beautiful to see at the same time. That was love of the throw. That was more
Well,
important than the competition.
So when you won that world championship, and even, this could even double as a question, then maybe even it's more legitimate from the 85 standpoint. But when you won that first world championship, did you feel like you were a big world champion? I mean, did it feel like something more than maybe it was, or was that something that kind of came later, where you felt like, where was it not such a big deal at the time and later on it was a bigger deal? Or how did that rank? You know what I mean? Because it sounds like, it sounds like to me, and obviously this is one cool about this with me, is like, I know you pretty well, but I don't know anything about any of this part of your history. And so this has been a good education from my standpoint too, but it sounds like you were committed to a few other things, not just golf, several other events in the overall.
Yeah. The world championship did mean something. To be honest with you, based on my makeup at the time and not fully understanding all the things from my childhood, what I actually felt was relief.
Oh,
It wasn't celebration. It was relief. Thank goodness I didn't mess it up. I didn't feel pressure, but I felt a sense of relief. And then I was, even though 1962 and 1982 are 20, there's 20 difference there. I was actually 19 at the time because my birthday is late in the year. And as the big celebration, Ed Hedrick came up to me and wanted to drink champagne. And that was a strange experience, that, and it was warm and I was a 19-year-old and, 21 was the drinking age. And so, I mean, my youngins affectionately poke at my awkwardness from time to time. And it's been with me a long time. And that was,
okay.
It was a wonderful, I felt very proud about it. There was an amazing sense of accomplishment. The celebration thing was kind of awkward. And that wasn't why I was doing it. I wanted that idea of what a throw feels like right as it's ripping out of your hand. That is the whole thing for me. And there is a feel to that that feels proper. And
Especially when you get a hold of it right.
yeah, and if I did the proper thing right, that's what I was trying to do. It wasn't, people talk about winning a championship. And if you're focused on the championship, that's not gonna help you. And then the next higher level is playing against the course. But I still don't think that's the highest level. And at least for me, I was playing against how close I could come to my expectation of what that throw would feel like.
That's really well put. That's interesting. And especially what everybody out there should realize is what you were throwing, what you were feeling, what you were channeling those were all basically midnight flyers. They were all the promo. Those are all frisbees, the trademark frisbee. This was the year before Innova started. So even the next year when you did the distance competition, which we're gonna quickly show the video that you're probably gonna cringe at, but it's
Ah,
it's when we're talking thumber rollers. I mean, I'm the first thing that when I read that when I was doing the research was I was thinking Don Wilczek in Texas throwing the
Oh
Condor
yeah.
thumber roller, and that's got an edge on it. You guys were throwing, and Dave was trying to perfect that thumber roller with a regular big lid.
well, and Don had, even back in the Frisbee days, his thumber roller was so good that it would spin when it hit the ground because the rotational velocity was greater than the forward velocity.
Wow.
Yeah, he had it was an amazingly powerful and
I never
excellent.
saw him. I never saw him throw it with a lid, but I've seen him do it plenty of times with the Condor, and holy cow, could he
Yeah,
get? I saw him roll through, waist deep grass before with that Condor, and go 400 plus, and you're just like, this isn't supposed to be happening. How's he pulling this off?
So just for we'll pick down the volume on that, but there we go. We have the golden boy with the tube socks and the short shorts, just absolutely chucking these midnight flyers. They're all midnight flyers because they made them a little heavier. But look at this is a year after you've won the worlds, and this was this you actually one of my notes on this one I can't remember, but I believe you might have even won that distance contest.
I think I won one. That's at Huntington Beach, and that's Dave actually giving me coaching tips right there.
There he is.
I was there were other people there who were better at distance, but I kind of lucked out because the wind was almost that was almost into the wind, and my particular throw, there's no way I could have ever won if it had been with the wind distance, because other people were much better at using the wind and could throw it higher than I could with the wind. But I kind of lucked out with a wind condition that wasn't favorable for a big distance number, but kind of helped me.
Just so we could put this in context, you did win that championship, that distance championship at the 6th annual Coors La Mirada Open. You threw 357 feet with one of those midnight flyers, beating Frank Aguilera with 355, Randy Amon, a legendary figure himself, with 347, and the 1981 world distance champion record holder, Dave Dunapace, was 20 feet shorter than you.
That doesn't, man, I'm not good with the history. That was at Huntington Beach, that photo there.
Mhm.
I don't ever remember winning anything at La Mirada. I did pretty well. I was in the
Okay.
distance finals a couple times.
Well, that
But Frank and those other guys, that was almost always with the wind, and they were better at that than I was. Mine generally was a more line drive kind of throw.
well, you were definitely good enough to win that day, and it was captured for all time and lives forever on the internet.
Yes, and the short shorts and the tube socks to boot.
Yeah, there you go. But you were pretty lean there too, Harold, and you got a full head of hair. So
Yeah,
it's you gotta take the good with the bad
Yeah,
there.
it's got to take those
I'm ready
blessings.
to hop back into the time machine.
Well, let's skip ahead to 84. This is I mean, I hope you don't mind us going year by year, but 84 certainly there's really two interesting big things about that. And Mace, maybe you want to start us off with that.
In 84. So in 84, you played the PDJ Worlds in Rochester with 140 men. Sam Ferens wins at the age of 16 by 5 strokes. Mike Sullivan took 6th. You took 28th. Sam had a distance record Was it, excuse
He
me.
did say it then.
Oh, he didn't set it then. Oh, yeah, yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Okay.
That's my mistake with the notes.
Well, so that was, that's all the way across the country. Was that the first time you traveled like that? Or had you already done
Uh,
some big traveling before that, or?
I believe that was the first time I'd ever been to New York. Um, interestingly, the Eagle and then the Arrow uh, were, of course, wonderful creations that changed my life. But I sucked with them. They didn't. They didn't fit my.
Really?
I just couldn't, and I couldn't putt very well. With I was actually better. It wasn't until the AVR that I started being a good putter again. Um, you know, back I think in Rochester, I was still putting with an arrow, and at the same time, I was. That was about as I was more into school. And yeah, I remember it's like, man, Sam is good and he's kicking my butt. Um, and you know, it wasn't until 1985 when there was, you know, different discs to throw that I felt, you know, my game kind of come around again.
Well, certainly, Sam at that time winning as a 16-year-old, I mean, that cements his permanence in the disc golf horizon. But for you seeing this kid come up, that must have been. I understand from some of the videos he might have been a little cocky at the time too.
It's possible, you know, you know, I really, my personality, I really didn't see anyone else, you know, while I was playing. You know, I would try and be considerate and take score and do it, but I was, and some people, I think it came off as, man, he's kind of into himself, and it wasn't that. I was into my game. So I remember Sam winning, and the truth was he was so many groups ahead of me that I wouldn't have, you know, we weren't inhabiting the same group. He played beautifully, and it was amazing. But I really don't remember that much other than him winning, because one, we, like I said, we were in different groups, and two, I was trying to win, you know, so.
Sure.
Well, let's
So
yeah.
go
Sorry,
ahead, Paul.
No, go ahead.
No, you got this one.
Well, I was just going to skip ahead to 85, which may or may not be your most successful year as a professional disc golfer. That's you capture your second world title. That's you go to Tulsa, and we had actually Andy Lehman on, who was talking about the moment when she was the first one to appear at the Tulsa Worlds, and the first three people that she met were you, Tim, and Dave Dunapace, and you guys hooked up and played practice rounds out there. Obviously, it helped you out because there was a huge field, 203 players, and you win, and you know it's not two strokes, still a good win over Eric Markson Snapper. Dunapace 8th, Sammy Ferrens, the champ from the year before, took 11th. And just a quick little shout out to two touring Canadians there, Vandenberg and Elaine King, their first appearances at the Worlds. Talk to us about going to Tulsa for the first time, about winning for the second time, about the whole experience there. You say you rediscovered your game with the new discs.
Yeah, there was, you know, the AVR, you know, was a great putter. It's still a great putter. Every good putter is a variation on an AVR.
Yeah.
I had a lot of confidence putting AVRs going into Tulsa. I didn't do very well in the opening round, didn't do horribly. And we went to one of the courses that was the short technical course, and I did really well there, which was that wasn't really my strong suit. And after that, I was pretty close to the top. I don't think I ever had the very best round, but I was close, within 1 or 2 strokes of the best round each time. And during the finals, it was very close actually between Eric Marks and me. And Eric had kind of a tough stretch, and I pulled a little bit ahead and was able to, keep going. And with both that day and in 1982, it was an amazing accomplishment. And it meant that I was the very best that day. There was no diminishing that, but it didn't mean much more than that either.
Certainly.
There were monthly events right after that where I got my bottom kicked, so.
Well, but I mean, even back then, just like that was probably one of the first places where, this has happened all over the country, a few different places in the country, but that was probably one of the first places where you look at it and you go, well, we don't need to go anywhere. We got all the best events right here, and all the people are coming from elsewhere to play in our event. So why should we travel? You know what I mean? Like, people have said that about Southern California, then they've said it about Northern California, they've said it about the region that you live in now in the Carolinas. And, I mean, it could be said about Michigan, it could be said about the Twin Cities and Minnesota. I mean, you could be said in the Kansas City area too. Like, why should we leave? We got all this to go for. But that was, I mean, like, if you look at these names and the names that keep coming up, like Eric Marks, he was definitely one of the big names in Texas when I came up. And, I still remember a couple times that I got the privilege of playing with him. And in the 90s, he was still, I mean, he was 10 years older than or 15 even at times. And to some of the times that we played or that we're talking about now, but he was still amazing. And then he had the beveled edge disc. And like, that's one of the things that's really cool about telling your story here, Harold, is that there's just so many names that I didn't realize went, back to the same era that you came from. So that's really something else.
Well, in 1985, not only did you travel to Tulsa, but you got on a plane and went to another continent. Was that your first time going to Europe?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
One other thing before we left Tulsa, Dave and I also won the doubles world championship.
That's right.
And that's probably
right
why
there.
that's probably why he had a hard time in singles, because he carried, I don't think I threw one good throw that whole doubles round, but he played amazingly.
You saved it off for later, huh?
I must have, because I was a heavy burden. But yeah, then later that summer,
2 weeks later,
we went to Sweden, to the southern part of Sweden and Helsingborg, and that was the first time I'd been to Europe, and that was kind of right after I'd graduated from Southern Cal. So I kind of had let's go to Europe and travel around a little bit before I went to Helsingborg. And there were so many amazing things about Sweden and the way folks were treated. I loved the way it was even on, I remember parts of the disc golf were on the TV in 1985.
wow.
And I remember it
Wow.
because they pronounced my name Duvall. And it's like, oh, I like that. I love that translation. You know, that's a good omen. And I played pretty well, but Sam again was better. I did well, but not well enough.
Well, you did well enough to take a podium finish, tying Conrad Damon for third, just a couple strokes behind one stroke behind Snapper for second. And again, Sammy shines again on that kind of stage. But just before the tournament starts, before the first frisbee's thrown, you're 22 years old. You're the first two-time ever PDGA world champion. What's your confidence level like?
I felt pretty confident in my game. Back then, I was not the most prepared person. So, and the example of going into that event, unlike now, if I'm going to an event where I'm actually playing disc golf, my discs ride with me. You know, it was painful to arrive in Europe and my discs be not in Europe. And so I borrowed discs and bought some discs for that event. So for
Your
everyone,
discs were lost in transit?
yeah, I didn't.
Oh, man.
I mean, that's and the ones I got were pretty close to what I played with. So I was lucky in that regard. That was really more, you know, Sam was just the best at that event. That was more a cautionary tale of, you know, make sure you bring your disc with you.
Yeah, don't check them.
Because that was a big, awkward, nerve-wracking scramble.
Still taking third with borrowed plastic. That's
Yeah.
pretty huge.
And it was really neat to see, you know, disc golf around the world. And that was one of the reasons Dave and I got together with Charlie and Tim to start Innova. You know, we wanted to perform, you know, and this sounds a little bit big-headed, but kind of at the end of the Frisbee era, we were better than the technology. And the technology, you couldn't perform fully athletically, and especially if it was windy. So we wanted people to perform. And there was not equal distribution of the really nice heavy whammo discs. And Dave and I weren't always the recipient of the heaviest stuff. So we wanted to try and make sure that everyone had really good piece of equipment to play with. And we wanted to change the world one throw at a time. And disc golf is a form of recreation, and you know, recreation is recreating us. We need it like we need food and shelter and water and connection. As youngins, we learn to play before we learn to speak. So play and
That's true.
recreation is even more fundamental to the human experience than language is. And so trying to help people play, I mean, this was still before still kind of the Cold War, and is a much different world back then.
For sure.
And one of the ways to bridge differences is through play. And that was kind of the third reason we wanted to start Innova. We want more play across the world, and we want good stuff to play with.
Well, and it's an international language, so I mean,
Yep.
I don't know that maybe it hasn't been thought of like that, but I think that that's pretty obvious. So we're about to make a big segue, but there's two more. There's 2 more years, and one of them is incredibly pivotal. So I don't want to ignore those. But in 1986, it was your first time to the Carolinas for the PDGA Worlds in Charlotte. Is that correct, or was that in '87?
No, that was 1986.
Okay, so 1986. So this, if I'm not mistaken, this proves to be a pretty pivotal trip in your life.
Absolutely. For a couple of reasons. One, a much smaller reason was a nice reality check. I remember we were in the doubles again, and Dave and I had won the doubles the previous year, and we were in the final pairing of groups, and there was a TV reporter there, and it was strange, back then you'd do anything to get publicity, and so
For sure.
they had people right there on hole 18 as we're getting ready to play. And at the time, I'd won half the world championships. Now there weren't that many, 2 was half of 4, so but it was still 50%. And
That's a pretty big, that was a huge percentage at the time, actually.
And the question that the TV interviewer asked me as I'm on the tee of 18, they said, "Oh, I understand you're the Jack Nicklaus of disc golf." And
Nice.
I thought about that, and it's like, dang, that sounds pretty good. And then I promptly went to throw it in the street. And I remember
On camera?
Dave saying, "I guess not."
Right on cue and on
Yeah.
camera.
But during that tournament at the Adams Mark Hotel, where they had, the big tournament central, I met the lady who I would marry, and give me 4 amazing youngins, and we courted cross country for almost 3 years, and she convinced me that South Carolina was better than California, and I can truly say that. Pardon me, choking up there. Disc golf changed my life. I have. She has since passed. I have 4 amazing youngins that are kind of on earth, my way of touching eternity, and that came directly through disc golf. So
That's a pretty amazing story.
So while I was clearly not the Jack Nicklaus of disc golf, something much, much, much better than that, started through disc golf and started from coming to Charlotte for the first time.
Was
Well,
that the same? That wasn't the same tournament hotel that we had in '97, was it?
Maybe.
Maybe. Come on, Harold.
I don't remember. It might have been.
Okay. You probably had no reason to go to that tournament hotel once it was decided anyway.
Well,
So
they had the, I helped out with that event. I wasn't the primary organizer, but Winthrop was part of the
'97.
97 Worlds,
That was
And
my first time to go there.
it might have been the Adams Mark because for the longest time, it was the main convention hotel in downtown Charlotte. So it
Yeah,
might
it
have
was like
been Adams Mark.
it was like over there by I think where Independence Loop takes off or something.
Yeah.
Right around there on the eastern side. So yeah, I remember that pretty well. That was 97, 96 was my first Worlds, but then 97 was where I met Jonathan and I met you and I remember meeting Goob. You know, I remember those fantastic scoreboards that he made from that year for that year as well. But enough about all that. So you went and played that 86 Worlds. You took 20th and you were 4 ahead of Donna Pace. And then in 87, that was the big change when you moved out there. You took third did you win? Was that the Laurel Springs? Oh, you took 4th in the Laurel Springs Open that year in 1987.
Yeah, at the time, I was still boarding cross country. So
So
I
you,
didn't,
you were playing quite a few tournaments in Carolina there.
yeah, I had a hefty incentive to come on back. And it was that was a transformational event in that Laurel Springs was, I think, the first course that I saw, and maybe the first course ever that had predominantly multiple shot holes.
Hmm.
It had some par threes, but it was primarily multiple shot holes, and that made a big impression on me. It's a lot of disc golf, the way it was designed, par three before that, it was amazing, but it's also psychologically not as wonderful when it's all par three, because you either pass the test and get a birdie, or you fail the test and get par or worse. And that it was quite transformational to play a different psychology on a multiple shot layout.
Certainly for me, coming up in the game in the mid '90s, I found out about the game in '93, but fell in love in '95, and I just consumed any kind of disc golf media I could, the early World News and the Disc Golf Journal, and seeing the set of discs, the world famous discs, the best disc golf holes in the world. They made Innova made, I don't know if it was all 18 or whatever. It was my goal to try to play each and every one of them, and I'm pretty sure that Boylan Family Farms had one of those best disc golf holes in the world on there. And so for me and for most of us who grew up in that time or grew up in our game in that time, Laurel Springs occupies this kind of almost mythical center of the universe idea. And for you to put into that perspective that it was the first place you've seen where there are multi-shot holes, it's not just a Christmas tree farm. This was literally perhaps one of the best disc golf courses on the planet at the time. And
Yeah, Bill and his family did an amazing thing. And it was kind of magical. And the mountains of North Carolina are, as they say, they're a local call to heaven. It's a beautiful place. And to play that kind of transformational disc golf there was very special. I early on I said, my disc golf story is one where a lot of folks helped me and mentored me and interacted with me, and certainly Dave and Charlie and Tim and Bill Boylan was one of those people too, and the people in the Carolinas, Hall of Famers Alan Biebler and Stan McDaniel and Carlton and Steve Lambert. They were all in that crowd up in the mountains of North Carolina. It was amazing.
Yeah,
Well,
that was on the way out and pretty much gone right about the time I started traveling, and I heard about it, but the closest local story I ever heard about it was a friend of mine went and didn't realize that he was going to need to get in early, and so he went on the trip anyways, but he didn't get in, and he got disappointed, and he went out there and he realized just how disappointed he was, because of what he saw and what he didn't get to play, and I think maybe he got to play a practice round out there, but like that was, well, there wasn't a lot of people that traveled out of here back in those days, there was a few of us, but that that really didn't start taking off until the 2000s, and even later in the early 2000s, like towards 2010 and 11 and 12. So that's I feel like I really missed out there, unfortunately.
I signed up for the AM Nationals, which was supposed to be at the Boylan Family Farms in 1996, and they sold the property sometime before the tournament happened, and they had to switch gears and have it. And I can't remember where it was now, but I was so disappointed not to be able to play the World. That's how close I came. That missed it by that much.
Yeah,
But you
it
mentioned it.
was
Sorry.
at Laurel Springs. And Steve Lambert, that was one of his great contributions to the game, that whole idea of AM Nationals, which became US Amateur National Championship. That was the predecessor event for that. And it was at Laurel Springs.
And I love the fact that even that the best amateur tournaments, the best amateur players need to play the best courses and not have to, dumb them down so that they get to graduate properly to a pro level.
They
Now
need to know what they're going to be up against,
Let's just reset here the big the segue that Mace was referencing here, and this is kind of the second part of the interview, which is now spilled over the hour mark, and I hope that you don't mind chatting with us a bit further here, but we can't go on any further without talking about how you and your crew revolutionized the game. It's now 40 years. Happy birthday to the company. Innova Champion, in my belief, strongly the makers of the finest discs on the planet since 1983. You kind of briefly mentioned how you were all connected. I find that a really interesting story there. One of the comments on Facebook posting of that photo I showed of the four of you was from Michael Williams, and he said, "These guys were my role models, and all I wanted to do was beat Harold on the course, learn from Dave, and be like him as a person." And then he says, "I didn't know Charlie that well." And I think for all of us, none of us really know. I think it may be a surprise for many people to even find out that you have a brother. And he's kind of the mystery figure in the whole founding myth of disc golf. So maybe you could talk more about your brother and his role in we all know that Tim was the operations man, Dave was the mad scientist, and you were the golden haired beauty boy in the front, if you excuse that.
Yeah, with the tube socks. Don't forget the tube
with
socks.
But talk about what Charlie brought to the table with all that.
Yeah, I mean, I am the youngest of 6. And
Oh, okay.
I have 4 older brothers. And then my sister, and my oldest brother is 7 years older than I am. So
Okay.
you can do the math. We were pretty close in age. And bless my mom's heart to have, 6 youngins in 7 years.
She had a lot of cast iron in her, didn't she?
Absolutely. And but it may sound strange if you're not from a big family, but for different reasons, Charlie and I were always, closer, even though he wasn't next to me in birth order. He was 2 siblings away. And being the youngest, I kind of looked up. He was, kind of my hero, big brother that I looked up to, and was in many ways, he was into Frisbee a little bit earlier than I was with the Frisbee class at San Marino High School. And he, I imagine, wanting to be like my big brother, that's how I got started. And as the Innova foundation story is really one where Dave had this amazing idea and painstakingly created prototype discs by soldering flight plates onto another disc and carefully, painstakingly. And I remember he showed me that, and he wanted me to give it a test flight, but he knew my grip. And I says, be very careful. This took a lot of time. And I remember I threw it and the flight plate went one direction and the rim went another. And he said, I have one other one. Please be careful. And he was throwing it more than I was at that point, because I was being careful. That's just my grip was not conducive to prototype Frisbee testing. And so right away, I could see this was so much better. And Dave, I was just, we were friends. We bonded over championship basketball at Irvine, and we were friends, and we had competed, and he was going around to the people in Southern California. There were several, folks who were entrepreneurs. Jan Sobel was an entrepreneur, and Snapper Pearson. And for one reason or another, no one was jumping at it. And one day he was showing me, and I said, let's do it. Why don't we do it? And during my sophomore year in high school is when my mom had passed, and Charlie and I and my other siblings had inherited about $40,000 each, and that paid for my schooling at Southern Cal and starting Innova. In her passing, she changed my life too, gave me my education, and gave me, in some ways, the livelihood, the pastime that I've had for 40 years. But Charlie and I, everything we had at that point was about $200 or $300 more than that first tool and that first run of discs. And it's like, man, this better work, or
Really?
we're
So you put it all in, and you just barely had
it
anything
was all in, yeah. Charlie
get
and I
some money for cardboard boxes and tape after that, and
yeah, and we Charlie and I were living paycheck to paycheck for a while after that. That cushion that we had was gone. But Dave's design, the Eagle that first came out wasn't really what he was aiming for. The tooler actually made a mistake, but it was still revolutionary. It changed the game of Frisbee golf into the sport of disc golf. Yeah. And Frisbee golf was amazing. I won a world championship in Frisbee golf. But the Eagle and then the Arrow changed the game into a sport.
And I mean that the fact that you have given public credit to so many blessings in your life due to Frisbee golf. All of us and every guest we've ever had on here say the same thing. We owe so much of gratitude, so many of the blessings in our life, so many thanks to disc golf getting somehow in our lives. Sometimes it's a mystery. How does it? Each person has a different path. Sometimes it's torturous, sometimes circuitous, sometimes it's a direct path to the world of disc golf. But once we found it, the portals have opened, and we see the world through a different lens. I couldn't even imagine my life if I never heard about disc golf. I mean, I always knew about frisbee, and on behalf of everyone out there, we all have to thank you as being a fundamental player in the architect of our happiness. Really, that's not too hyperbolic to say, I don't think.
Well, thank you. I appreciate for my contribution and all the other people who put me in that place at that moment.
And so what was like when you guys first hit the ground, you're all in on the investment, you get the first run of discs. What was the first reaction like amongst the players?
They could see right away that it wasn't just throwing far. That was the most obvious thing. But a couple of the other things that we wanted to do was it was throwing far with control in the wind. Because particularly when it got windy, the frisbees just were not, it was just a matter of survival on the course. When, we've all played when the chains are clanking in the target, and that was very tough. Still tough, can be tough now, but it was super tough with a frisbee. So the chance to perform and to make the game a better balance, I think, of technique, skill, and athleticism. Right as frisbees, there was a time before the eagle landed and frisbees and the night flyers, there was also the super heavy puppies and super puppies and brand X's and 220, 230, some might have been 240 grams. And those provided such a huge advantage to strength. And strength is a legitimate athletic attribute, but it was too much about strength, and it overshadowed technique. So I think the eagle and then the arrow promptly, the eagle was only there for a very short run, about 10,000 discs altogether. And then,
How long did it take for those to go away? I mean, for those 10,000, like how quickly did you run through those and you got onto the arrow?
It didn't seem very long. We ran them pretty quickly, and the eagle was amazing, but it wasn't precisely what Dave was aiming for. It was a little bit understable, and he wanted more of a neutral, a flyer that could really perform in a wider variety of both flight angles and wind conditions. So it was, I don't remember exactly, Brian, but it seemed pretty quick that we were retooling to get to the arrow.
How much difference is there between those two discs? I mean, I've only seen a couple eagles, maybe less than 5 in my whole, I mean, and to clarify, anybody else that's listening, especially the younger crowd, we're not talking about the EL or the EX, or, the driver that Spike Kaisers and that kind of thing. We're talking about a disc that was similar to the AVR, like the predecessor, obviously, but also the predecessor to the Arrow, with a fat edge, blunt, but still more of a beveled edge, obviously, than the lid.
Yeah, it was the first real bevel edged. I want to say the first golf disc There were essentially Frisbees before that. And those were throw and catch kind of things, heavier
Right.
versions of that, and some were smaller. But I really think the Eagle was the first disc created for disc golf. And there was a big difference flight wise between the Eagle and the Arrow. You know, the Eagle was not as stable as we wanted it to be. Neither the Eagle or the Arrow would ever, no one would say they're overstable now. But we wanted something that performed better across a wider power band and wind conditions. But if you looked at them now and either went back to all the predecessors or went forward to all the discs now, you would say they look very similar. Because they are very different than what's generally used now or what came before them. So there were important differences, that Dave could share in detail.
Right.
But when you look about what came before, those two were very similar in that they were so different.
So let's talk about the naming of the company. From what I have gathered from the research, it's you who came up with the name for Innova. Is that true?
Yeah.
And so
Um,
tell us about the whole naming of the company.
Well, we started with Champion Disc, and that seemed natural because Dave and I were world champions, and actually Charlie was a world champion too in DDC and in guts, actually. And so Champion Disc seemed very appropriate. And at the time, in the sporting world, there were lots of champion things, and champion is a great thing to be. But part of our story wasn't just about being champions. It was about innovation. And that was more special and really spoke to our story. And Dave just thinks at a far higher level than I do. He loved the idea of Nova as creation and things of that nature. And so all of that came together for a long time, it was Innova Champion. And then over the years, it's pretty much been Innova Disc Golf.
Well, that obviously the champion side is it, but I really like the whole idea of the explosion of the putting the creation in the recreation, if you will, and putting the Nova in the Innova. And I think, once you look, obviously every time we look back, retrospective vision is 2020, but in this kind of case, it seems so natural, it almost writes itself, and you were the author of that, really. So I find that really fascinating, wonderful story. But listen, we're here. We take up an hour and a half of your time, and we're only into the second part of our whole script here. We don't want to take up more of your time, and we do want to wish you, hopefully you could come back and join us to talk about some more things. Most importantly, you've got really strong legacy with course design, and of course, we can't talk to you without talking about the USDGC and Winter Gold. But would you be averse to picking up this conversation at another time when you feel comfortable?
Absolutely. I'd love to end on the USDGC.
Well, what if we pencil this in for the practice week? Because we're gonna be doing interviews at USDGC for sure. But what if we try to wrap this up the week before the championship?
Sure.
Would you be available like maybe Monday or Tuesday night? And we could go ahead and finish like, because we're going to be here for another hour and a half if we keep going with this, or maybe two. And it's, I understand sometimes jumping out of some of these conversations with folks, and although I hate to do it, but I don't want to not finish this one with you, because I know there's a lot of people that want to hear the rest of this.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. And the USDGC, one of the things that's also transcends time is the transferring from the father to the son. So I've been so lucky to have been, leading the course design at the championship. And now that's done by my son, Andrew.
The Doobie's got the keys to the kingdom.
It's
He's
absolutely,
a pretty cool kid.
and it's he's done a fantastic job. And just yesterday, to kind of tie a bow on Innova and disc golf changing our life, we had two of my coworker got married at Innova.
Wow.
And so
Yesterday?
we had a wedding celebration in building 1, and
Who was it?
it was Michelle, and she and her husband, they met spotting on hole 18. Yeah, that's
Nice.
part of their story.
Wow.
And the idea truly, was, I was sobbing yesterday, that idea that disc golf still changes lives 40 years later was amazing.
Well, that is, that's, I mean, like, I think every one of us can tell a story, and I'm not going to go too far with mine, but I can go back to one person, and that's Jerry Gotcher. And he introduced me to disc golf. He also introduced me to hockey. And without going too far with the whole details, most of y'all know this anyway, but that is obviously pivotal in my life. But then another thing happened because I know disc golfers, and I discovered glass art because a friend of mine, I called on a Saturday and said, "Hey, what are y'all doing?" And, well, we're going to see PJ's band at the Arts Goggle. Well, PJ's band was playing in the parking lot at the Glass Studio. So I watched 3 songs, and then I watched a 3-hour demo, and the rest, the two of us for sure know the rest of that story. So, I mean, it's but I thought of that when Paul brought it up, like, you're a Gateway friend too, and you've got 40 years of being a Gateway, and that's just an amazing, like, my friends and my friendships are my fortune, and to think of that, that's amazing.
That's beautifully put, Brian. I've really enjoyed my time tonight.
Thank you for
Yeah,
taking
and we
all
have
this time.
too.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely, we'll have, do a little bit of digging in person and over the phone and whatnot, but that's going to be a great show to wrap this up in the week before the championship.
All right, guys. I hope you all have a swell night.
Thank you so much for taking this
Harold,
time.
thanks for joining us, and thanks for the first half of this. And I just want to say publicly, I think your kids are pretty awesome too.
Thank you.
And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing them all again in the not too distant future. So
thank you. They're absolutely the best part of anything I've ever done.
Well, I tell you, I've done a lot of research, a lot of dwelling, and a lot of looking at photos and whatever, and I creeped your Instagram, your tweets, your everything, and I feel like I know. I've never met your kids before, but I feel like I know them, and I just feel like you can tell just from a photograph the calmness, the serenity that radiates out of their eyes, out of their face, out of their smiles. Same with you. You've got a wonderful smile, so keep smiling, keep brightening up your corner of the world. Okay.
Thank you. I am stupidly blessed.
So thanks again, Harold. We really appreciate you taking all this time to talk with us.
All right, guys. Hope you all have a great night.
all right, Harold, we'll see you again real soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. All right, so you can just go ahead and hit your end there, Harold, and jump out. Paul, you want to?
Hit the leave button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. This was awesome. I enjoyed it.
Thank you,
Thanks a
Harold. I
lot, Harold. We
appreciate
really
it.
appreciate it, man. Definitely.
We'll see you.
All right, have a good one. All right, dude. Good show there. That was
It was awesome. It was
probably
great
got 2 hours left. I mean,
fun. Well,
for the,
we
lucky
can't
for
stick
us,
to- Yeah.
lucky for us, he only played till 87. I mean, like played significantly till 87. So he's our first guest that we got all the way through his career on. But yeah,
Well,
this is good. That's going to be a great way to start that week.
Yeah.
And well, and so before we jump off and just go over to our private side of this and talk a little more amongst ourselves, I've got a few announcements to make, or actually mostly just scheduling announcements. So we got next week on the 6th, we got Barry Schultz, the other champion, as he's named himself. On the 10th of July, we have Nolan Grider, who can throw an arrow better than most of y'all. On the 20th and the 25th, the 20th is a Thursday, the 25th is a Tuesday. We're going to have a Reading on each night. I have not been told who's going on which night, but one of them has an appointment on one of those days, so they won't be appearing that day. But we're going to have Jay and Des Reading on the 20th and the 25th. And as we've all done already with other couples, we're not going to bring them on the same day. We're going to give them each their day. And then we're also, I've already talked, I actually didn't talk to you about this, B, but I'm sure you're not going to have a problem with it. But they're going to be, we're going to have them on during the championship week, and we're going to talk about Edge. And Edge, the educational disc golf experience is 20 years old this year. And so Jay mentioned that a little bit. And I said, well, why don't we'll do a solo with each of you, and then we'll bring you together, and we'll do an Edge show. And if Frisbee Rob happens to be in town, then we'll bring him in on that too. But so that's the 20th and the 25th. We're gonna have Levon Wolf on the 1st of August. We're gonna take the week off of the 7th of August because I got a gig in Florida, and I just don't think I'm gonna have any time to squeeze in a show. We got David Wiggins Jr. on the 16th of August. We're gonna double up the next week. We're gonna have Chris Sprague on Tuesday, the 22nd. We're gonna have John Houck on the 24th. I'm working on my buddy Hal Baby for the following week. That is definitely unconfirmed, but it's in the works. We have Sam Ferens on September 6th. Crazy John Brooks on September 13th. I don't have anybody booked the week of the 18th of September yet, but I'm working on something there. We got Barsby the week before, the practice week. So we'll have Harold and Barsby so far that week, and we may add more. Who knows? I mean, that's
ambitious
coming into
enough
the
right
time,
there.
but that's the week. That's the week. And by the way, it's 97 days to championship week and Monday qualifying. So
Yeah.
mark it on your calendars, buy your tickets. Tickets go on sale this week for USDGC. Another announcement, we will be launching a page on maceman.com for the Good Times Hour very soon. And if you need some discs, they're available at maceman.com now. So I think that's all I have right now for announcements, but I'm sure I'll have some more things to talk about next week when we get together with the other champion, Barry Schultz.
Beauty. Nice guy.
Yeah.
Exciting
So,
stuff for the summer. Exciting stuff for the summer.
yeah, we're pretty much almost booked up all the way. I got a couple other people that have said yes, and I just haven't figured out where to put them in. Greenwell's one of them. I'm fishing pretty hard. I'm looking at a lot of different people. I've got a couple other requests out there that I haven't heard back on, and hoping to set up something with Dave Dunapace the week of the championship if he's there. That may or may not happen, but we'll see what happens from here.
Definitely down a pace would be. And just before we go,
Look at
let me show
that.
Look at that. There's Tim, Dave, and there's the Golden Boy wearing the Golden Boy t-shirt. And that is just some kind of contraption they're standing beside. I wonder if that was the practice basket in the shop.
That's pretty interesting. They did market one at one point that had a plastic top and a plastic bottom. And then it had tubes hanging off the top of it like that too. But I don't think I ever saw it on the market, but I've seen it in their shop a time or two. So it's probably, been archived since then. But yeah, that's a pretty amazing, pretty good target. We had a lot of folks stop by tonight.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll read off of what, man. I mean, we had a lot of people stop by tonight, probably the biggest one so far. We had buddy Sean Clark from locally here, John Fidge, one of Harold's nephews, really good friend of mine out there in South Carolina, Josh Day, another one of my really good friends. I've known both of these guys since they were kids, including Harold's kids too. Like there's a mob of middle 20 somethings out there that I've known for this whole entire time, 25 years, and so that's pretty neat. Buddy Chris Ware, Seahorse from down in Austin or from Round Rock. One of my poker buddies, James Jewell, stopped by. Cody Duvall stopped by for a little while. John Haggerton, Ryan Bev, I can't pronounce these names. Bevilacqua, yes, I never got there. Jeff Davis, Ray McCullum from the Entertainment Days, Jim Oates stopped by, Andrew Thomas Fuentes, Dennis Warzen, Michael Williams, Chad Sullivan, Jonathan Grubbs, Ted Barber, Tim Birdie, Javier Kowalski.
Javier, wow.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get him on at some point too. Zach Owen, Deborah Rydell, Pete May, Dennis Warzen again, my buddy Brad Bishop, Ryan Hunt, John Nichols, Roger Vranick, John Hart, Jeff Johnson, John Nichols again, Eric Friedman, E-Rock stopped in, John Dunn, Dennis Integer, Chuck Smith, Terry Calhoun, Michael Moss, Jason Wilder, Kevin the Big Lebowski, Barry Noble, Ray Murray, and Pete again. So that's pretty good.
That's awesome.
I don't know that we ever got past 10, but that's about 40 people that stopped by for a little while. So that's pretty neat. So we're moving along. Things are going good. We're working on this, folks. This is not something that we've pushed hard yet. We're really starting to push it harder. And we're doing our best to bring you, some great stories from some really good friends of ours. So
hopefully they find the stories and the storytellers as fascinating as we do.
Man, I tell you, I've been having a blast. So
yeah.
Oh, it's time to do? Time to get out of here and check on the draft.
Oh, that's right. Connor Bedard.
Big week in hockey. It's the last week for hockey news of the summer.
No, free agent frenzy.
Maybe 2 weeks, but yeah, that starts Friday. So
Saturday isn't free agent frenzy.
Excuse me, Saturday. Yeah, free agency Saturday.
Boy.
So I think I read something today where they said this was, I think it might have been the first time in the history of the NHL draft where there was no trades on day one in the first round at all. Like there wasn't a trade at all last night.
Wow.
I heard that Barry Trotz was trying to. I read that that Barry Trotz was dangling a really solid prospect for 2 different teams to try to move into the top 5, and they wouldn't even budge.
That kind of deep of a draft, eh? Wow.
Yeah, so and that was pretty crazy. I watched it. It was really boring because we didn't have a pick in there anywhere.
No, I mean drafts are only good if you're either it's in the town where you live or love, or your team's got 1 or more first round draft picks. Otherwise, it's like, come on.
Yeah, the Bluesers had 3.
We might have to have a much more spicy NHL picks for next year's playoffs.
Oh, I know a couple people that'll jump in. I mean, there's a few people that are already jumping at the bit, but I mean, we could definitely pick some people, pick some homers, obviously, but it'd be a lively conversation.
Absolutely. Well, that was a great show. I'm so happy that Harold decided or agreed to be on the show with us, and I'm really happy that we were able to to have him entertained and engaged.
Yeah, well, and that second part of that show is going to be great. Without a doubt. There's well, yeah. I've got a feeling that these 3 pages we didn't get to is going to turn into another 7.
We'll fluff that script up even more. We'll have a lot
Yeah,
of
for
time to
sure.
work on it. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us. We appreciate all the eyes out there on us. And, you know, we always appreciate disc golf at disc golfers. And hopefully the common thread that people catch from the shows is disc golf changed our lives. It's brought us fun, friendship, frisbee, companionship, fitness, all the important things in our life. And everyone says the same thing. They can't imagine their life any differently. And all the blessings, most of the blessings they have in their lives, they owe to frisbee. So this is, as I said, Harold is one of the founders, one of the pillars of the whole universe that we know. And he has been directly responsible or indirectly responsible for thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, just transforming their life and revolutionizing the way they see recreation and fun.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that's hopefully, if you like what you saw tonight, there's several of you that have stopped by for the first time. I will be processing this video and doing my best to get it up by sometime tomorrow.
Nice.
And I think that's number 27 that we have on our YouTube channel, Good Times Hour 12:15, at Good Times Hour 12:15 in YouTube. If you want to check out any of the previous stuff we've done, we've got a pretty good list that we're growing once a week, and every now and then we'll throw a couple extras. I'd say probably, we might be able to get as many as 8 or 10 full-length interviews out of that trip to South Carolina alone. So we'll see how it goes.
Absolutely. All right, let's stop the recording, stop the streaming, and take this private.
All right, man. Talk to y'all later. Thanks a lot for stopping by, everybody. And thank you, B, for all your hard work. And I look forward, man. We've got good 12 weeks of lineup already right here. So, all right, folks, we'll see you next Thursday.